The 2026 FIFA World Cup meal at McDonald's is underway with one of 9 legendary cups in the lineup. Christian Pulisic, David Beckham, Lamine Yamal, Ronaldinho, Thierry Henry, Son Heung-min, Alphonso Davies, Santi Jimenez. And between the posts, it's Grimace. Get one of 9 collectible cups with a FIFA World Cup meal.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last. All rights reserved. 2026 McDonald's at FIFA World Cup 2026.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Welcome back to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor, your one-stop shop when it comes to animation news and commentary. I am entertainment writer Jim Hill, and Mr. Taylor, whose writings in the industry you can regularly read over on The Wrap, and whose musings on the Mission Impossible movies you can still listen to over on Like the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. He and I are recording this week's show on Sunday, June 14th, 2026, and that's just a few days out now from Toy Story 5 officially bowing in theaters, though we did have some news break just today about the live-action version of Lilo and Stitch 2 at Disney Studio is prepping. And is this the part of the show, Drew, where we talk about how you've been sitting on this news since, what, March?
At least March, yeah. I've known about this for some time. The news is that Chris Sanders is writing and directing Lilo and Stitch 2, and I was told to wait on that. I think they meant wait for us to give it to THR. But, yeah, that is the story. Yeah, he's been very passionate about this. He is looking forward to telling a new story in the Lilo and Stitch universe, one that he has wholly created himself, and I'm very excited. I know people were kind of like, down on this online, but I'm excited about it for sure.
Well, okay, we will talk at length about this news in the middle portion of this week's show. But before we do that, we, of course, need to acknowledge our sponsor, and that is UnlockMagic.com. And if a Disney and Universal trip is anywhere on your radar in 2026, Unlock Magic helps you lock in great ticket prices without the stress, all handled by people who really know the parks and, more importantly, know how to save you money. So if you're thinking, okay, maybe this summer, this is when we finally go, head on over to unlockmagic.com to grab the best ticket deals and then make that future trip just a little bit more magical. So, all right, and this is part of the podcast show where we take a brief look at this past weekend's box office in North America, and not really surprised that Disclosure Day did as well as it did, number one at the box office. And Drew, you like this new Spielberg quite a bit, right?
I did. I really, really liked it a lot. And if you were watching the NBA Finals, you probably saw a commercial with my quote saying as much on there. So, yes.
There we go. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I still get jazzed when that happens. I get happy for Drew. But anyway, to be specific here, $44 million in ticket sales in North America, which makes it Spielberg's 5th highest grossing film of all time at the domestic box office. Also, it's its highest opening for an original title. And I guess 48 million overseas, so 93 million overall for an opening weekend. On the other hand, Obsession, oh my God. You got to remember, folks, when this film opened back on May 15th, it made $17 million, sold $17 million worth of tickets in North America. And the way this normally works is, okay, that's your opening weekend, and then, of course, your ticket sales go down. And what is this? This is the 4th weekend in a row where Obsession has sold more tickets than its opening weekend, right? I mean, the gross this weekend was 19 million. And What is it? As of right now, this Curry Barker movie has made $188 million stateside and an additional $98 million overseas. So it's at $286 million worldwide. And it only cost, what, $750,000 to make? Is that right, Drew?
Yeah, I've heard less than 700,000, but yeah, somewhere, whatever the number is, it's very impressive for this kind of success.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just what's fascinating to me is when something like this happens, thinking back to the Blair Witch Project, it's always interesting to see what other studios make in kind of the wake of this, trying to apply the same lesson. Conversely, Scary Movie 6, this past weekend, second weekend at theater, saw its business fall off by 73%, which, Drew and I have talked about this on the show. Anything above 60 is acceptable these days, right? I mean, you that's what you want, right? So
you want lower than 60, yeah. Lower than 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yes, when your business falls off by 73%, that's a bad thing. On the other hand, Backrooms, again, another low-budget film that's doing great business. I wanted to ask Drew, have you seen some of the fan-made cartoons that have been set in the world of Backroom that are out there now?
No, I mean, it feels like Epcot was basically Backrooms for a long time. So that's the thing, is that I don't know if I would find the Backroom scary, because I feel like I would just be like, oh, this is an old mall. I'm into this. But no, I have not. Tell me about these fan-made films.
Well, no, they are. What they've done is somebody has taken classic Warner Brothers cartoons, a couple of the Bugs and Daffy ones, and there's a second one that puts Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner in the world of Backroom, and it's really a really fun repurposing of a couple of the Chuck Jones things that have been done. Just really smart use of it. Moving down the list here, in the number 5 position, we have Masters of the Universe. Second weekend in North American theaters. Sadly, this one also saw business fall off. Well, not 73%, but 71%. And I just feel bad for Travis. But as consolation, I want to point out that the original Masters of the Universe, when it came out in 87, its entire run in theaters, it only made $17 million. So this new film has effectively tripled the box office of that movie. I mean, that's got to be some kind of consolation, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we, as Amazon said when it debuted, that this is not the end of the movie's life cycle. There's all the other revenue streams, all the Mattel action figures that need to be sold.
All true.
Yeah.
All true.
Yep.
All true. Speaking of other revenue streams and action figures, Mandalorian and Grogu, fourth weekend in theaters, only sold 4.7 million. And just so you understand how this most recent Star Wars film was done so far, folks, that's 165 million in ticket sales in North America, an additional 150 overseas. So it's 315 million worldwide. From what I understand at Disney, what they really want this to do is do better at the box office than Solo, a Star Wars story, did back in the summer of 2018. But that's 392 million, and I don't know if at this point Mandalorian Grogu has enough gas left in the tank to do that.
Yeah, this is a big disappointment. Any way you slice it, and yeah, not exactly the return to form that Disney was looking for the first Star Wars movie back in theaters in 7 years. So.
All true. But on the other hand, if you talk to anybody at Disney, they have already pivoted to wait for next year, wait for Ryan Gosling and Star Wars Starfighter. Everybody's going to love that. So, okay, whatever. Michael, on the other hand, eighth week in theaters. Again, just 4.1 million in ticket sales, but that's still 362 million all by itself in North America, an additional 569 million overseas. And we talked previously on this podcast about it opening in Japan. In fact, it just opened in Japan this past Friday, June 12th, and was number one at the box office there. So 932 million at the worldwide box office, and it seems like $1 billion might still be in reach. And then bottom five were Airbag, The Furious, and Stop That Train with 3.8, 2.75, and 2 million at the box office. Did want to circle back on an animated title that we had talked about on the show previously, and that was Animal Farm, which opened in theaters back in April, and you folks may recall Drew and I talking about this. This was an Angel Studios acquisition of an Andy Serkis film. That said, though, the not great box office. Total of 5.5 million in all of North America for its entire theatrical run. Overseas was even lower, just 500,000. Worldwide box office of 6.5 million total. And mind you, if you're interested in eyeballing it, it's already available for rent over on Prime. It's $17.99 a rent, and if you want to own your digital copy, that's $24.99. Whereas the DVD and Blu-ray of Animal Farm, that goes on sale July 17th, and I bring this up because, again, Drew and I are huge supporters of physical media, and in fact, toward that end, early this week, Drew, I drove to my local Best Buy because I was intent in buying an actual physical copy of Hoppers, Pixar's latest, at a brick and mortar store, and should have been there. It went on sale on June 2nd. And
Best Buy doesn't have any physical media, Jim. This has been the case for like a year or something.
Actually, yes. It's early 2024.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
And talking with them there, they were like, no, we did this because, the consumers are increasingly shifting to streaming platforms. And that's actually what they have in the store. The all of the stuff you can use when you're streaming a film. And now, mind you, in fact, I guess this says a lot that the physical media version went on sale June 2nd. June 3rd is when Hoppers became available on Disney Plus. And, in fact, this past weekend, anecdotally here, Nate said I spent some time with her sister who had her grandsons at the house. And while they were there, one of the little boys mentioned that, he had actually seen at school about an hour of Hoppers and had really liked it. And so what does Grandma do? She fires up Disney Plus and they start watching the rest of Hoppers there at the house. So I don't know what to tell you, Drew. I'm beginning to think that physical media is definitely threatened now. If how long is it going to be till I guess right at this point, Amazon's my only recourse if I want to get a physical copy of Hoppers, and what happens when they decide this isn't worthwhile?
Well, it's just becoming a more specialized commodity. It's like vinyl records or anything else. There are a ton of great physical locations out here, places like Vidiot's or Amoeba, that you can go and grab your things. I know it's harder for you, Jim, and Amazon is very fickle when it comes to what they stock and what they don't stock, but I'm still trying to be optimistic about physical media because I just love it so much. Yeah.
Well, same thing here. But when we get done here today, I guess actually, to be honest, I will probably wait till Amazon Prime Day. I guess they're doing a 3-day sale, June 21st to the 23rd, and I'll get my hoppers and I'll pre-order my Animal Farm then. But anyway, okay, that's the box office related news, folks. When we get back from this break, Drew and I are going to share some, again, dive deeper into the Lilo and Stitch story, and likewise share some news coming out of the UK in regard to Aardman. But before we do that, there's this.
This show is brought to you by Weight Loss by Hims. Look, we all want to lose a few pounds, but here's the thing. Losing weight doesn't have to be hard. Weight Loss by Hims makes it easy to get started and then keep going. Hims is a simple, personalized approach to weight loss. You connect with a licensed provider 100% online and get a care team to support you every step of the way. Better yet, Hims gets you access to a range of FDA-approved GLP-1 medications, including the Wegovy pill and the Wegovy pen. And if prescribed, your medication is then delivered right to your door, no insurance necessary. So, for the summer of 2026, are you ready to reach your goals? If so, visit hims.com/tune to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's HIMS.com/TOON, hims.com/tune. Weight Loss by Hims is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restriction, visit hims.com. We thank them for sponsoring today's show.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam, you came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every Year After follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every Year After, now streaming only on Prime.
You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
And we're back. Okay, folks. So if you've listened to this podcast previously, you know that Drew and I are obviously huge fans of Aardman animation, which is why what just happened over in the UK, which I guess this is something that's done annually. Obviously, it's a new thing under King Charles III, but his birthday honors, birthday's honor list was published on June 12th, and I guess some 1,200 individuals were recognized for their exceptional contributions to British life and public service, and this did acknowledge some folks in the arts. For example, Dame Helen Mirren received the prestigious Order of the Companions of Honor. But on the animation side of the fence, it was worth noting that Aardman founders Peter Lloyd and David Sproxton were knighted. And these are the guys who got this animation studio started back in 1972. And of course, over that time, we've had things like Chicken Run, we've had Shaun the Sheep, and of course, Wallace and Gromit. And Drew, you came across a Gromit autobiography that's going to be published later this year?
Well, yeah, that and also the fact that they're going to be on coins in the UK.
That they are. That they are a 50 pence coin. That's honoring the 50th anniversary of Aardman Studio. In fact, and you have your choice of, I guess there's a a silver, there's a painted version, there's going to be a gold version, and it will include Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep Morph, and Feathers McGraw stamped into metal there. But again, you were talking about what is it? Grand, the autobiography of Gromit, right?
Yes, it is a memoir that is being written by Gromit to Nick Park, as told to Nick Park. So he is the author. It will be available this October from Penguin Random House in the United States. You can pre-order it now, and it's got a really fun cover. And I can't wait because I love Wallace and Gromit so much, and it just seems like a lot of fun. So you can order that right now, Jim. Another piece of physical media for you.
There we go. And by the way, just want to point out that it's being published by Penguin, as in,
That's true, Jim. That is true.
There we go.
My God.
By the way, this book hits store shelves on October 27th. And just want to point out that's 3 weeks after Drew's next book. The Art of Wildwood hits store shelves on October 6th. And by the way, again, Amazon Prime Day coming up. Perfect time to pre-order a copy of that book.
Perfect time.
Okay, and all right, since we're telling you things to put on your calendar here, want to talk about Gatto, which arrives in theater March 5th of next year. And if you listen to last week's show, we Drew and I talked about how we're up in Emeryville. We sometimes get directionally challenged and, wander into places perhaps we shouldn't and see some stuff in advance. And you were mentioning last week that you did not see anything of Gatto, right? But that you'd heard that it was a pretty marvelous movie,
yeah,
right?
Everyone is really excited about it and how it's going to look and what the story is going to be. And they showed us that trailer before Toy Story when we were up at Pixar, which was really nice. There's some really big surprises in this movie that I hope are going to be, concealed, if not until the movie comes out, until at least closer until the movie comes out. But I'm so stoked. I'm really excited. I love Enrico, and I will be seeing more next week, Jim. Let's just put it that way at Annecy. So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Headed to Annecy. In fact, you got your first look at this last year, right? When you were over in France for
that's
the
right.
animation.
Yeah, during the Pixar presentation, they announced it. They showed what we thought was concept art, and then the concept art started to move, Jim, and that was when it was actual animation from the movie. Perhaps not in the final, but, obviously test animation. And, they're working hard on it right now up there in Emeryville, and, cannot wait to see more. I'm so excited. So excited.
And this, again, what's kind of interesting about this project is that it's a different art style for Pixar. Visible brushstrokes, interesting flattened perspective. In fact, what's kind of interesting about the teaser is that you do get a little taste of that. These don't look like your standard Pixar characters. On the other hand, anyone who actually has ever had a cat in their life will recognize the behavior almost immediately. And by the way, is that Mark Ruffalo and Lawrence Fishburne in the teaser?
Yeah. Mark Ruffalo plays Nero, and Lawrence Fishburne is the cat. I forget what the mob boss cat. I forget what his name is, but they're both in the trailer. So. Yeah.
Evidently, the mob boss is called Rocco, and the black cat is called Nero. And the log line for this thing is when an unexpected friendship forces Nero, a black cat, to reconsider the path his life has taken. And that's the thing. When this thing starts, this black cat is indebted to the local mob boss, Rocco. So Nero embarks on a journey through the city's canals and back alleys in search of purpose. And I really want to see this.
Yeah, they showed an image at Annecy last year of a young girl sitting on a bed with Nero. So the idea is that he will he's never been a pet, Jim. So it's all about this friendship with this young girl and how that changes him because he's a bad kitty. out there in the streets getting into mischief. So yeah, it's going to be really, really special. Yeah.
Can't wait. Well, again, Gatto is March of 2027. On the other hand, if we jump ahead to May of 2028, that is when the live action Lilo and Stitch 2 is supposed to arrive in theaters. And again, the Hollywood Reporter revealed just today that Chris Sanders is going to be writing and directing that film. Again, information Drew has been sitting on since March. And what's interesting about this is last year's live action Lilo and Stitch, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, was the second highest grossing film for all of 2025 domestically. It made $423 million in North America alone. And only Minecraft the movie made more money, but the interesting thing is only $150,000 separated these two from one was number 2 and one was number 1. And that's literally the difference. And by the way, Lilo and Stitch made an additional $614 million overseas, worldwide gross of $1,038 million. And by the way, Chris voiced Stitch in that film, just as he did in the original hand-drawn film, which, by the way, released to theaters June 16, 2022. So the day this podcast goes live is actually the 24th anniversary of the original theatrical release of the original Lilo, hand-drawn Lilo and Stitch. Sanders then goes on to do the character's voice for the video premiere of the Stitch the movie. That makes it out into theaters just over 2 years later, August 25th, 2003. Also did the character's voice for Lilo and Stitch, the animated series, which debuted on ABC as part of its Saturday morning lineup in September of 2003. Then went on to do Stitch's voice for the second video premiere, Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch, and that debuts August 30th, 2005, and basically 2 years to the day that Stitch the movie goes on sale. And weird little bend on the story, Lilo and Stitch 2 was originally supposed to be released theatrically, but it was the underperformance of both Return to Neverland that came out in theaters February of 2002, only made $48 million in North America, followed by Jungle Book 2 that came out a year later, February of 2003, and that just sold $47 million worth of tickets. That's reportedly what made the mouse think, yeah, let's not put the second Lilo and Stitch premiere into theaters. So it's not honestly not a surprise, given Sanders' history, that he agreed to come back and voice this character for the live action Lilo and Stitch last year. But back to the 2025 movie. By the way, that was directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, who did a wonderful job on Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. And again, we've known that a sequel to the live-action Lilo and Stitch was coming. It was late June of last year. They showed that thing that had been shot on the Disney lot of Stitch driving a car around, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And, as Drew mentioned, we've known since July of last year that Chris Sanders would be writing the screenplay for Lilo and Stitch 2. And again, the word is that it will be a brand new story set in the universe. My understanding is the one note that the studio has given Sanders is they'd like him to find a way to bring Angel into the story. She is Stitch's girlfriend, I guess, that was introduced in the animated series. And, the only reason they want him to bring Angel in is she sells a ridiculous amount of plush. Or at least that's so I've heard. But beyond where the story for the sequel might go, Drew and I both have copies of From Pitch to Stitch, the origins of Disney's most unusual classic. Chris had that basically self-published back in January of 2022, and there's a good chunk of story in there about Stitch's crew, the folks he used to work with, that it would be interesting to see if Sanders decides to resurrect some of those characters and bring them back.
Yeah, it was basically like he was part of a biker gang.
Yeah. So there is material there. And in fact, if you can chase yourself down a copy of From Pitch to Stitch, you can see all of the other things that almost happened in Hawaii. But in between there, Chris wrote and directed The Wild Robot for DreamWorks, which arrived in theaters back in September of 2024. And only in March of this year, we learned that Wild Robot Escapes is officially moving forward on, but it's not Chris directing this time. It's Troy Quayne, who did such wonderful work on Nimona for Netflix, which, again, remember, folks, that's the film that started over at Blue Sky and then got resurrected by the folks at Netflix. And then, and what is it? Heidi Jo Gilbert will be co-directing with Troy. Is that what you've heard, Drew?
Yes, she was head of story on Wild Robot and responsible for so much of the great stuff in the first movie. So this is a very, very deserved promotion there.
No, absolutely. But again, I guess what fascinates me about it is that, again, Chris is going to write the screenplay for Wild Robot Escapes, but not directing this time around. And by the way, in regard to live action direction, Chris has done this before. There was, of course, Call of the Wild, and that was released to theaters back in February of 2020 with Harrison Ford. And but that, as that was arriving in theaters was when the pandemic was kind of rising up. And honestly, Drew, the same thing happened to Call of the Wild that happened to Pixar's Onward, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and it just sort of disappeared during that period. But anyway.
The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't undo your last hire. The lone wolf, who you thought was a good collaborator because you didn't have the right candidate insights. But once you hired them, it was all hoarding info, declining meetings, and howling at the full moon? But LinkedIn Hiring Pro can go deeper than just the resume to find you a perfect fit. By using insights from the LinkedIn network to give you a short list of best fit candidates. Hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
But speaking of directing live action, of course, there is Dean Dubois, who worked with Chris on the original How to Train Your Dragon, as well as the original hand-drawn, Lilo and Stitch, and he in turn directed the live action How to Train Your Dragon last year, June of 2025, which then went on to gross $636 million worldwide, and we have our sequel coming out next year. In fact, basically a year from this week, June 11th, 2027. And I guess what's interesting is that Chris became a Disney legend, largely on the back of Lilo and Stitch. Dean hasn't gotten that honor yet, but has done great work, obviously, over at DreamWorks. And in a moment, we're going to talk about two folks who also one was made a Disney legend and one was not. And we'll talk about who we're talking about in a sec. But first, this. And we're back. Drew, before we talk about one Disney legend and one who is not, you had some news that you found. Well, first of all, the Spidey and Amazing Friends Friends thing. They're expanding the cast there with some Marvel favorites.
Yeah, I mean, Spidey and His Amazing Friends is the Disney Junior show that I know so many friends who have kids watch it. But Rocket, Groot, Mr. Fantastic, and Silk, who is also the sort of Gwen, Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, are all going to be on the show in season 5. So I just thought that was interesting that they're bringing more characters from the extended Marvel universe into this kids show. But Jim, they got to get the preschoolers ready for Doomsday somehow. So this is really
that they do. Actually, they have a fun stylization that they do for the preschool show of the Marvel characters. It's just interesting to see sort of the filter they use there. On the other hand, we have talked on the show periodically about Ray Gun, which is the project that Brad Bird's been trying to get made since the 80s, right? The
not
late
the
1980s.
80s, Jim. Good God, no, early to mid 90s, I would say. Right before he was pulled off of Ray Gun to work on Iron Giant. So that shows you how long this has been in development. I believe it was at Turner initially, which was then bought by Warner Brothers, and I'll be able to tell this story one day, Jim. People just have to die first, But
yes, I have a bunch of stories just like that.
Yeah,
so, But now, speaking of Ray Gun, though, Brad is getting the band back together, so to speak, in more ways than one for the music side of Ray Gun, right?
That's right, Michael Giacchino, who is a good friend of mine and who is, I think, one of the best composers working today. They confirmed that he is doing the music. And now I have to stop myself, Jim, before I get shot by some kind of tranquilizer dart and then get knocked out for the rest of this podcast. But I think it's very exciting. He obviously worked with Brad. He's worked with Brad on every movie since Incredibles. So,
that's the thing. In fact, worth noting, we were just talking about, what is it? Gatto. And is it 2027 when we're getting in Incredibles 3?
2028 is going to be Incredibles
2028.
3. Yep.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay. So hopefully Michael will be back.
I think
in the
Michael
saddle
will be back, yes. I ran into Pete Sohn at the Toy Story 5 premiere, which is always wonderful. I love that guy. He's such a great guy. Yeah.
Sweetheart. Okay. Well, and speaking of animators that Drew and I love, Floyd Norman. We just learned this past week that the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences at their 17th Governor's Award, which is going to be held on November 15th of this year, Floyd is going to receive an honorary Academy Award for his career in animation, and he's in pretty huge company here because Glenn Close is also going to get an honorary Oscar at this ceremony. Likewise, Ridley Scott. Has Ridley not received a director's Oscar?
He has never received a competitive Oscar, correct.
That's crazy. Ridley Scott has never been honored like that?
He has
Holy
not.
Cow.
He has not.
Okay.
Let me make sure that is the case. But usually they don't give they don't give them out to people who have already won. But let me just He's been nominated 3 times, Jim, for Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, and Black Hawk Down. And Gladiator won for Best Director, for Best Picture. And he received a nomination for Best Picture for The Martian, but he's never won a competitive Oscar, which is really... It really sucks because that guy is one of the best.
No, absolutely. And we were talking previously about Disney legend. Floyd Norman has been an actual Disney legend since 2007, whereas Margaret Kerry was not. I know from folks who worked that side of the street, I guess there were some discussions over the year about potentially recognizing Margaret, who, again, was the model for Tinkerbell, on the Peter Pan that Disney sent out into theaters in February of 53. And we bring this up because Margaret, she passed away this past week at the age of 97. She had been battling lung cancer for a while now. And, sadly, this past week on June 11th in Wilmington, North Carolina, she, in fact, her three children, Ellen, Christina, and Eric, were there. But again, she'd been battling lung cancer for a while, and we lost her. And I was lucky enough over the past 20 years or so to get to know Margaret. I mean, we did a lot of Disney fan events together. In fact, I want to say a couple of times when I was effectively I was the Drew Taylor of Dayton Disneyana. I moderated all sorts of panels and that sort of thing. And I was lucky enough to get to interview Margaret, and she had this amazing career. I mean, that went all the way back to the Our Gang comedies. I mean, she worked with Mickey Rooney in A Midsummer's Night Dream, the one they did back in the 1930s. And anyway, as she grew out of being
she was
a
also
child
in
actor,
she was in an awful live action Disney movie called Summer Magic as well. I'm sure you discussed that as part of your Disneyana.
Well, that's what's kind of interesting about her time at Disney. That it was kind of a revolving door. She would work for the mouse, and then a decade or two would go by, and then she'd come back. And well, she talked about how she was basically working as a dancer in the late 40s, early 50s in film, and had just done an Eddie Cantor movie when she learned that Disney was looking for, a diminutive dancer to come do some live action reference for a project that they were working on. And it was all very mysterious, but Margaret prepared an audition. It was kind of a pantomime act she did to our record, and she went to Disney, did that for a bunch of guys on an empty soundstage, and they were like, perfect. Be here next Monday morning, and we'll explain the job to you. And so she showed up, and it was one of these things where for the next 6 months, she would show up Monday through Friday, and it was one of these things where they would sometimes have giant props for Margaret to interact with. They would have giant pairs of scissors, or they'd form a keyhole out of wire. And the notion was, okay, what could you do with this? What could you, how could you make this funny? How would you interact with this if you had to deal with a 10-foot tall pair of scissors? And, and this is the thing. So, they would film her, and they would often then go back and refine what she had done. And then Disney never likes to admit when it rotoscopes, and in fact, but the interesting thing is you can go online now and look at footage of Margaret Kerry on an empty soundstage at Disney when she's pantomiming as Tinkerbell. And so much of what she did on that stage wound up in the films. In fact, I was lucky enough to befriend Mark Davis and his lovely wife Alice, and Mark was very upfront about the fact that we were fumbling. We didn't know who Tinkerbell was. That, in fact, what a lot of people don't talk about is that Disney had been prepping a version of Peter Pan. In fact, it was going to be directed by David Hall, that was supposed to be in theaters in the early 40s. And the studio got into financial problems, not to mention World War II happened, so the project was put on hold. And by the time they decided to revive the project in 48, Walt literally had 3 movies that were partially done. There was Cinderella, there was Alice in Wonderland, and there was Peter Pan. And, but these were all earlier versions that had been started in the late 40s, late 30s, early 40s. And what ends up happening is that Walt makes a judgment call and it's like, okay, I think Cinderella is the easiest one to start up again. And, that gets released to theaters in March of 1990. And then right behind that, July of 51, is Alice. But Peter Pan is the one that it is honestly the hardest for Disney to get their arms around. And that doesn't make out into theaters till February 53. But Margaret Kerry spends 6 months on an empty soundstage interacting with, giant hand mirrors and all of this stuff as Disney tries to figure out this character. And the irony is that Tinkerbell turns out to be so successful, the breakout character from the film, so to speak, that when Disney starts up the Disneyland television show, just, a year in 6 months later, who's the first character you see on the screen but Tinkerbell? And in fact, she becomes a huge component of that TV show. She becomes effectively the ambassador of Disneyland. In fact, if you look at early Disneyland merchandise catalogs, there's more Tinkerbell material than there is Mickey. And of course, she then becomes the featured, performer in Fantasy in the Sky Fireworks. I mean, Tinkerbell, became a very big deal on the back. And again, it was all because of Margaret Kerry standing there on a freezing cold soundstage, pantomiming and giving these guys some ideas of what they could do with Tinkerbell. What was also fun about getting to interview Margaret is that, again, she's on the Disney lot in, 52 or thereabouts doing all this live action reference. And this is when they're actually starting the early work on Disneyland. And so, she kept having to change the soundstage she was working on because they would start building things that nobody was supposed to know about. And Margaret kept asking, well, what's the deal with the stagecoach? And it's like, you guys make it a Western? It's like, shut up, Margaret, go over and dance on the thing. So, but anyway, long story short, folks, she was a good friend at these Disney events. In fact, she had, I want to say just a couple of years ago, she reached out. She had just moved to Sarasota, Florida. She had just married her third husband, and she was like, the next time you're in Orlando, Jim, come on down. I know you've been wanting to go to the Ringling Museum. We talked about that at the last date in Disneyana, and you come to town and we'll go to lunch there and we'll wander the halls. And sadly, we never got around to it. That her health began to spin in, and that's that. But anyway, I just bring this up because it says a lot when you're 97 years old and people are like, we lost her too soon. Anyway, just want to close up by saying that Drew and I extend our sincerest condolences to Margaret's extended family and her group of friends at what obviously has to be a sad time. And Ms. Kerry will definitely be missed. And hey, the Disney legend people, can we now look at getting Margaret, say, a posthumous award? please.
The whole nominating committee is screwed up. Yeah. That's there's a lot of people that they should.
Absolutely. And in fact, let me throw another name out here because you've mentioned this. Susan Harris. The woman who did Soap. Didn't she also do Golden Girls for Disney?
Yes, she created that entire Saturday night block of Golden Girls, Nurses, and what was the other one with the big dog?
Empty Nest.
Yes.
And here's the thing. Disney is still making money off of the Golden Girls. In fact, I just got a press release this week. The second, the Golden Girls Cozy Mystery, that they've launched a series of mystery books. And it's like, you're telling me that, Susan Harris, who created all of these hits television shows that Disney is still making money off of, and we can't recognize her. She can't be a Disney legend. Come on.
I've been screaming about this for years, Jim. I think Michael Graves should have a posthumous legend. The fact that they didn't give Bob Stern a legend before he died is like complete gibberish. A lot of it I feel like is very political and has to do with the Iger administration chafing against what Eisner did. And the fact that Iger is getting a Disney Legend ceremony before Eisner is also deeply screwed up.
The only thing I've heard there is that, my understanding is they've gone to Eisner now 3 separate times. And Eisner, keeps talking about when he did the Disney Legends and, they were all guys in their 80s and their 90s. And it's like, I'm not old enough yet. Come back again. I'll do it then. But yeah, there's something genuinely wrong when Bob Iger gets this award before Michael Eisner. But anyway, on that somewhat crabby note, let's bring this episode of Fine Tuning to a close. But also want to point out if you always enjoy Drew Taylor's the stories that he shares and his insights. And in fact, Drew won't be here for next week's Fine Tuning because he's on his way to France. He's going to be at Annecy collecting all sorts of great stories there and coming back and sharing them. But if you miss hearing Drew next week, want to remind you that he and Charles Hood recorded nearly 300 episodes of Light the Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast. And again, this is my go-to show when I'm in the car on a long trip because, again, these interviews, which have lovely stories about each of the Mission Impossible movies, but they also have the folks who've worked on these films, and what's great about what Drew and Charles do is that they get them to talk about the other projects that they worked on. And I learned so much from this podcast and hear so many tangential stories that are great fun. Though, speaking of podcasts, we got a couple here at Jim Hill Media you might enjoy listening to. We have a Disney Dish with Len Testa. That's our Disney theme park show. Likewise, we have our Epic Universal podcast. That's the one I do with Eric Hersey. And, in fact, he and his bride, Lauren, have just spent the past week down at Epic Universe and are going to check in. And by the way, Lauren and I also do the I Want That Too, the Disney merch podcast. And over on Patreon, that's the Disney Unpacked. That's the show that Len and I do with veteran Imagineer Jim Schul. And we've just recently published a show about the Disney castles. And we are working on one about It's a Small World. And what is the other one? We've actually spent the past week working on the show for July.
You're working on the Disney Toon Studios building, and I'm going to come and do and
that's right.
Bomb it. Exactly.
Well, no, it's actually. In fact, weirdly, that one we are doing about Pixie Hollow, where Tinkerbell was going to have her own land in the parks. But yeah, Drew's going to come in and share the stories that he has about Disney Toon Studios, which is where they made the Disney Fairy films. Anyway, that's all over the horizon there. But, as for right now, I want to take a moment to thank Eric Hersey and David Gray for the great job they do when it comes to, production of this podcast as well as the editing. Also have a quick favor to ask folks, if you could please head on over to Apple Podcast and rate and review not just this show you're listening to right now, but also Light the Fuse, because we want more episodes of that. And social media-wise, Drew, where can the nice folks find you?
On Instagram and Twitter at Drew Tailored, like a tailored shirt. What about you, Jim?
Let's see. You can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook is Jim Hill Media News. And with that, folks, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Fine Tuning. And on behalf of Mr. Taylor, who again is over in France next week, thanks for listening, and we will be back soon.